When the Prophet ﷺ was praising Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was praising how, like notice, he left him in his bed in Mecca, right? And then he left Medina to him during a battle, and Ali radiallahu anhu was upset because he wanted to go out. But there's a caretaking element, and that's part of the job of a prophet, to be a shepherd. And Prophet ﷺ is praising that, just like Musa ﷺ, when he left Harun alayhi salam amongst his people in that regard. So there are qualities. So with Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu in this regard, فيه إنابة على الفضل الذي جعل الله في عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه, as the ulama say, that there is a sign of the virtue, but also والأوصاف التي تكون في الأنبياء, but also characteristics amongst the prophets. And so what he's saying here, لما كان له من عظيم فضل وقوة في الحق وفقه بمراد الشارع. What existed in Umar radiallahu anhu of his understanding and his strength, and the way that he was able to arrive at the truth so naturally. He arrives at the truth naturally. Connect this, by the way, to when the Prophet ﷺ, like the example he gives is the loss of trust, the loss of truthfulness, as the sign of the day of judgment coming. And now someone who's connecting to what remains of an-nubuwwah. And Umar radiallahu anhu, in his sincerity in wanting to know the truth so he could abide by it. See, if you're truthful in your tongue, Allah Azza wa Jal will show you truthful vision. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu is showing us another element of that. As the Prophet ﷺ said, and another hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, إِنَّهُ كَانَ فِي مَنْ قَبْلَكُمْ مُحَدَّثُونَ فَإِنْ يَكُنْ فِي أُمَّتِي أَحَدٌ فَعُمَرٌ. Prophet ﷺ said that there were people in the nations that came before you who were spoken to. Muhaddith is someone who speaks. حَدَّثَ عَنْ فُلَانٍ. Muhaddath is someone who's spoken to. Spoken to by who? Spoken to by who? By the angels. The opposite of waswasa to shaitan, the whispers of the devil. The more room you give to the waswas of shaitan, the more shaitan will play in your head. He'll give you fatwas, he'll give you fiqh, he'll give you interpretations of the Quran, he'll grade hadiths for you. He'll tell you this really means this or that, or I like this interpretation, I don't like that interpretation. He'll make all of your wickedness righteous in a moment when you lean into the waswasa. And so you'll be so lost that it's not even that you can't believe the person in front of you. You can't even believe what you're hearing in your own head anymore. Right? Because you're entertaining the waswasa of shaitan by following a way other than Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas to lean in to what does Allah want from me right now? What did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do in a situation like this? What did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say about a situation like this? What do I think? Like, what would Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? What would Allah Azza wa Jalla say about this specific situation? And you lean into that, then you're leaning into the angels, the prompting of the angels. So muhaddath, like someone who's so naturally, divinely inspired towards the truth. And so in another narration, subhanAllah, I love this. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna Allah ja'ala al-haqqa ala lisani Umar wa qalbihi." Allah put the truth on Umar's tongue and in his heart. So perceptive. And so what it's speaking to is not that revelation comes to you, but you're just remarkably aligned with revelation because of how sincere you are to the truth. And how sincere was Umar to the truth? We're talking about a world where the Prophet ﷺ has left and all we have is the Quran. We have to hold on to the Quran. With Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would say things and revelation would agree. Think about that. Muwafaqat Umar radiallahu, I mean, it's a whole chapter in the books of the times that revelation came down to agree with Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. What he thought should happen about alcohol, and the Quran comes down and confirms it. What he thought should happen about hijab, and the Quran comes down and says it. What he thought should happen to the prisoners of Badr, and the Quran comes down and agrees with Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So his instincts start to match revelation. Does that exist after him? Absolutely. Right? There is that concept of ilham. But that ilham only comes ba'd al-iltizam, after holding on to the sunnah. Holding on to the Quran and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The way Umar radiallahu anhu did, his willingness to want to know the truth, and then his willingness to abide by the truth right away, with no ifs and buts about it, right? And that was Ibrahim alayhi salam. إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّ أَسْلَمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Allah tells him submit, he submits. So ilham comes after, Iltizam, otherwise, it is, to use slang, kharabish. It's all over the place, right? You don't know what's happening in your head, right? You have no idea what you're hearing anymore. Whispers, and that's why people come up with the weirdest stuff in the world, and they will call it ilham, you know? That's waswas al-shaytan with a nice packaging for you. Ilham is different in this regard. Here's another thing. So there is an idea of ilham that arrives as a result of sincerity, just like dreams will arise as a result of sincerity when the world becomes more confusing, right? There's ilham that comes through al-iltizam and the natural discernment of the believers. A believer can start to see things differently. So the narration, وَإِنْ كَانَ فِي السَّنَدِ ضَعْفٌ, if there's a weakness in its chain, but it's still true in its meaning. اتَّقُوا فِرَاسَةَ الْمُؤْمِنِ فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. Fear the perception of the believer because he sees with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sees things differently. He can identify things. He can look at something and he's connecting with it at a much deeper level. And that can be scary to be around too. Because he might see something and it's like, okay, be careful in that regard, because the believer is always looking deeper and deeper and deeper. What we talked about in the khutbah, by the way, about ulul absar and paying attention to the ibrah, people with deeper insight, because they're paying attention to what Allah Azza wa Jalla is putting around them. So that's one way that as the signs of the Day of Judgment comes, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the sharpening of that tool. Another way is through, so this is discernment, divine discernment. Another way is through pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. One of the reasons why the Prophet ﷺ gave us signs in genres, right, in different categories, is that you start to recognize the pattern, and you recognize the pattern of your behavior with those patterns of the signs occurring. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, لا يلدغ المؤمن من جحر واحد مرتين, and that a believer is not stung in the same hole twice. That means that you have to observe patterns, and that's part of how Allah Azza wa Jal inspires us towards the correct course of action. Do you understand? So when you have a bunch of signs that fit a genre, okay, I messed up here, maybe I'm messing up a lot, and maybe I need to get back into understanding how I should be acting in accordance with these signs. And then comes ilham, right? Another form of divine discernment. So divine revelation has ceased, but what we have is divine perception or divine vision that's not infallible, because we're not prophets. Only the prophets were infallible. But it's what remains of what the prophets have left with us. Now you move forward and you go back to the Quran. Of the signs of the Day of Judgment then is removing the authority of the revelation itself. So the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith of Abu Dawood, أَلَا وَإِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْكِتَابَ وَمِثْلَهُ مَعَهُ. Verily I have been given the book and something like it with it. أَلَا يُوشِكُ رَجُلٌ شَبْعَانَ عَلَى أَرِكَتِهِ. That verily there is a person that will arise, lazy, sitting on his couch, reclined. The image is of someone who is the opposite of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You think of Omar, you think intense. Ya Rasulullah, what's the truth? I want to know what it is. The opposite is, we're good. Relaxed and reclined on his couch. Shab'ana ala arikati, full, meaning what? Materialist. I like the part of the religion that says, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. I love that part. I love this part about pursuing wealth in a halal way. This is all great. And so, turning Islam into another form of evangelical prosperity doctrine, right? Like, I love this part of the deen. I love this ayah for my wedding invitation card. I'm not going to do anything that the Quran tells me about marriage, but I'll follow وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. I love this. This looks really great on our card. Let's make sure it's recited in the wedding. I love these إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Oh, it's beautiful. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ says, so a person is chilling on their couch, relaxed, reclined. And he says, عَلَيْكُمْ بِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ عَلَيْكُمْ بِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ. People should follow the Quran. People should follow the Quran. فَمَا وَجَدْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ حَلَالٍ فَحِلُّوا وَمَا وَجَدْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ حَرَامٍ فَحَرِّمُوا. So if something is halal in the Quran, then treat it as halal. And if something's haram in the Quran, treat it as haram. What does Allah say about these people in the previous nations? أما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله. Allah talks about the motivations. They want to stir fitna and they also want personal interpretation, because personal interpretation is great. There are no scholars. Hadiths are not authentic. I understand the Quran. If it's not direct in the Quran, I'm not going to follow it. It's not clear for me. It doesn't make sense. I don't like this interpretation. It doesn't fit my external framework that was taught in 2026 in the United States and will likely change in 2028 to an entirely radically different framework, and then I'll twist the religion to fit it then too. But that person doesn't say, I deny the religion. No, I'm a Muslim. I love the Quran. But all the other stuff can, it's subject to interpretation. Okay. Imagine a person dealing with their physical health that way. Actually, that's scary because we probably will use ChatGPT to do our own medicine at some point too, right? And just treat ourselves as doctors, right? But this is your life, your salvation. So what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, ألا إنما حرم رسول الله كما